Don't even think about showing up, Vanessa said sharply, her voice slicing through the calm morning air. I paused mid-step, my hand still on the doorknob, staring at her as if the words themselves were impossible to hear. The kitchen, freshly swept and smelling faintly of vanilla from the cupcakes cooling on the counter, suddenly felt like a room I didn't belong in. My heart thumped unevenly, not from fear, but from a peculiar mix of shock and disbelief. I took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch between us before replying, though I said nothing aloud. I just nodded lightly and smiled, a quiet shield against the sting of humiliation. Before I stepped back, I turned to the camera perched near the counter, as I always do, and spoke softly. Thank you for being here. Stay with me until the end, and let me know where you're tuning in from. The words hung in the air, an invitation and a promise that my story would unfold, piece by piece, and that the truth would eventually emerge. Once the recording light clicked off, I moved toward the dining room where the table was set meticulously for Lily's 10th birthday, each plate gleaming under the soft morning light filtering through the bay window, each napkin folded into precise triangles. Balloons, pastel and cheerful, floated in gentle clusters near the ceiling, and a banner stretched across the room reading, "Happy Birthday, Lily," in bright, playful letters. I had spent hours arranging everything just so, imagining the smiles, the laughter, the warmth of a family gathered together, sharing a simple, joyful morning. And yet, the empty chairs and the quiet echo of my own footsteps reminded me of how hollow the celebration had become before it even began. I poured orange juice into tiny glasses and placed them neatly in front of each chair, checking that each cupcake was centered perfectly on its plate. The living room clock ticked steadily, a metronome marking the passing moments while I waited, anticipating, hoping that someone, anyone, would arrive and fill the space with life. Outside, the early spring sun glinted off the sidewalks, casting long shadows through the windows, yet there was no sign of Michael. No hint of Vanessa, no sign of Lily skipping toward the door. I set down the last plate and took a small step back, feeling the stillness pressing against me like a tangible weight. My eyes wandered across the carefully arranged table, noticing the little details I had chosen with care. The miniature party hats, the bright napkin rings, the hand-painted name cards. Each item, a token of my love, now seemed to exist only for me. I walked slowly to the center of the room and ran my fingers lightly across the tablecloth, feeling the smooth fabric under my fingertips, grounding myself in the reality of what had been prepared and what had been denied. I inhaled deeply, the scent of fresh flowers mingling with the sweetness of frosting, and allowed myself a quiet internal sigh. In this quiet, I began to notice the subtle signs I had overlooked before. A single cupcake slightly tilted, a chair not quite aligned, the faint whisper of wind through a slightly open window. Each detail whispered a truth I had been hesitant to face. That this morning, the day I had envisioned with joy and anticipation, would unfold without the family I had expected to gather around me, and that their absence was not by accident but by design. I moved to the edge of the dining table and traced a finger along the surface, imagining Lily's laughter filling the room, Michael's gentle teasing, Vanessa's usual confident smile, and recognized, with a slow, creeping clarity, that the room would remain silent, that their absence was meant to be felt, meant to sting, and meant to set the stage for the reckoning I had long considered but never yet enacted. I straightened, holding my posture deliberately calm, my gaze sweeping across the bright decorations, the untouched plates, the careful arrangements, and felt a quiet determination begin to bloom within me, a steady resolve that despite the humiliation, despite the exclusion, despite the calculated indifference of those I had loved and nurtured, I would not be broken. I adjusted a balloon slightly, letting it float back into place, and whispered to myself, as much as to anyone who might be watching, that patience and observation could be as powerful as any loud protest, and that the morning's disappointment was only the first note in a symphony of truth that was about to be revealed. The house felt unusually quiet after the morning preparations. I moved slowly from the kitchen to the living room, noticing how the sunlight fell across the hardwood floor, casting long, narrow patterns that shifted as the day progressed. The balloon swayed gently with the faint breeze from the slightly open window. I ran my fingers over the spines of photo albums on the shelf, lingering on the images of Lily at previous birthdays, her small hands gripping presents, her face bright with anticipation. I recalled the laughter that had once filled this space, the warmth that seemed to radiate from family gathered together, and contrasted it with the heavy stillness now pressing against the walls. I straightened the napkins again on the table, making sure the little party favors were aligned perfectly, each a token of care and attention. I walked toward the kitchen counter and poured myself a cup of coffee, its steam curling upward in the morning light, a small comfort amid the empty chairs. I took a slow sip, savoring the bitterness and warmth, and allowed my eyes to wander across the decorations, the small cake I had baked, and the carefully arranged chairs. Every detail was precise, a reflection of the love I had poured into this day, yet their absence transformed each thoughtful arrangement into a silent accusation. I moved to the window and looked out over the quiet street, imagining Lily running up the driveway, Michael walking beside her, Vanessa following with her usual confident stride, and recognized with a faint tightening in my chest that none of this would occur. I placed the cup on the counter and walked back to the dining room, running my hand along the edge of the table, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingertips. Each motion grounded me, reminding me of the effort I had made, the care I had invested, and the reality of the situation I faced. I sat down on the chair at the head of the table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, and allowed myself to breathe in the quiet, noticing the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside, the gentle rustle of the wind in the trees. In this silence, my mind drifted to previous gatherings, times when similar patterns had appeared, subtle shifts in attention, small exclusions, and minor oversights that at the time seemed inconsequential. Now, in the stark contrast of the empty room, each memory gathered weight, forming a mosaic of deliberate neglect and understated cruelty. I let my eyes linger on the untouched cake, the plates, the glasses filled with juice, imagining the scene that might have been if the family had arrived, if laughter had filled the room, if voices had mingled and celebrated the day together. I noticed the small details, the way the candlelight would have reflected in Lily's eyes, the delicate arrangement of the napkins, the precise placement of each utensil, and understood that these were not just decorations but expressions of love, now unacknowledged and overlooked. I rose slowly, straightened a chair, adjusted a balloon that had shifted, and took a quiet step back, letting my gaze sweep across the room once more. I allowed myself to feel the full weight of the emptiness, the deliberate absence, and the unspoken message that had been sent. And in that realization, I found a calm determination forming within me, a silent promise that observation, patience, and careful planning could hold as much power as any loud protest, that the day's humiliation would not mark the end of the story but the beginning of a careful, deliberate response that had yet to unfold. I walked slowly toward the window, my hands resting lightly on the sill as I observed the quiet neighborhood. The spring morning sun reflected off the freshly washed cars in the driveway, glinting like small mirrors in the calm air. I could see a few birds hopping along the sidewalks, pecking at crumbs that must have fallen overnight, unaware of the tension inside the house. I turned back to the dining room and let my gaze travel over the empty chairs, the carefully arranged party decorations, the cupcakes lined neatly on the plates. Each small detail I had arranged with care now seemed to emphasize the absence of those I had expected to share this day with me. I recalled Michael's voice from weeks before, mentioning how busy he would be, how Vanessa had planned a weekend getaway, and how Lily had been excited to show me the craft she had worked on at school. Each memory had seemed ordinary at the time, but now they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. I moved to the counter and adjusted the glasses filled with orange juice, lining them up so the reflections of the sunlight would hit each one evenly. The effort felt almost ceremonial, a quiet assertion that I had prepared for this day with intention, even if my family had chosen to disregard it. I glanced at the little birthday banner above the table, the letters bright and cheerful, and imagined Lily's small fingers trying to reach the dangling decorations, her laughter echoing in the space that now felt hollow. I traced the edge of the table with a finger and felt the cool, polished wood beneath my touch, grounding myself in the physical reality of my preparations. I thought about the emails and texts I had sent, confirming details, making sure everything was ready for her special day, and realized that despite all the planning, the moment I had envisioned was not going to unfold as I had imagined. I moved to the sideboard and straightened a napkin, noting how a slight fold had shifted. The subtle imperfections reminded me that life does not always align with our expectations, that people can act in ways that are deliberate or simply negligent. Yet the effect is the same. The anticipation I had carried for weeks was met with absence. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of vanilla and fresh flowers fill my senses, and let my thoughts wander to other birthdays and holidays in the past, when small slights and omissions had left their marks, when intentions had been misrepresented or ignored. I could see the threads connecting those events to the present moment, forming a quiet tapestry of exclusion and oversight. I straightened once more, setting my shoulders back and lifting my chin slightly, feeling a quiet resolve building within me. Even in this silence, even in the absence of laughter and voices, I could sense the potential for action, the power of observation, of patience, of understanding the patterns that had been present for years. I walked slowly around the table, my fingers grazing the smooth surfaces of the dishes, taking in every detail, every minor shift in alignment, every subtle shadow cast by the morning light. I allowed the stillness to settle over me like a cloak, wrapping me in quiet contemplation, realizing that in this calm and careful observation lay the seed of understanding, the ability to see what had been hidden, to note what had been ignored, and to prepare for the moment when the truth could be revealed. I moved slowly toward the kitchen counter, my hands lightly brushing against the smooth surface of the polished wood. The morning light poured through the blinds, casting parallel lines across the floor and walls, highlighting the careful placement of each decoration. I picked up a cupcake from the tray and turned it slowly in my hands, noting the tiny imperfections in the frosting, the way the light caught the sugar crystals. Each small detail reminded me of the effort I had put into this day, the hours spent baking, decorating, and arranging the space with love. I placed it back gently, aligning the tray perfectly with the edge of the counter. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the floorboards were the only sounds in the house, emphasizing the absence of the family I had expected to celebrate with me. I walked to the living room and glanced at the shelves lined with photo albums, each book a record of birthdays, holidays, and quiet moments shared over the years. I pulled one down and flipped through the pages, lingering on images of Lily from past birthdays, her small hands clasped around gifts, her eyes bright with excitement, her smile wide and genuine. The contrast between these memories and the empty chairs before me was stark, a reminder of how intentions and expectations can diverge from reality. I traced the edge of a frame with my finger, feeling the cool glass beneath my fingertips, and allowed myself a slow, deliberate breath, centering in the quiet. I moved to the dining table and adjusted the napkins, aligning them precisely, and arranged the utensils just so, noting how the sunlight reflected off each polished fork and knife. I stepped back and surveyed the room, seeing the pastel balloons floating gently near the ceiling, the banner stretched across the far wall, the plates set with care. Each detail spoke of preparation and anticipation, yet now they seemed like silent witnesses to the absence of those I had hoped to be here. I moved toward the window and looked outside, imagining the street filled with the sound of footsteps, laughter, the patter of a small hand reaching for mine, and recognized that none of it would arrive. I inhaled deeply, the scent of vanilla and fresh flowers mingling in the air, and felt a quiet resolve forming within me, a growing awareness that while the room remained empty, the day was not wasted. Every careful arrangement, every thoughtful gesture was a reflection of my love and attention, and even in absence it held meaning. I walked slowly around the table, checking the alignment of the party favors, the placement of the chairs, the small details of the decorations, allowing myself to absorb the weight of the silence, the deliberate omissions, and the subtle signs that this exclusion had been intentional. I returned to the counter and poured a fresh cup of coffee, letting the warmth seep into my hands as I considered the patterns I had observed over the years, the repeated moments of being overlooked, ignored, or excluded. Each memory, each detail added to the understanding of what had been happening, revealing a quiet, deliberate strategy of neglect that had gone unnoticed until now. I stood for a moment, hands wrapped around the cup, observing the room with clarity, noticing the interplay of light and shadow, the precise placement of each object, and feeling a sense of patience settle over me, a realization that observation, attention to detail, and quiet reflection could be as powerful as any words, that this day, empty as it seemed, was also the foundation for understanding and for the subtle, deliberate actions I would take next. I moved toward the hallway, my footsteps slow, deliberate, feeling the smooth carpet beneath my shoes. The living room remained silent, sunlight streaming through the windows, highlighting the delicate arrangement of streamers and pastel balloons that swayed gently in the morning air. I paused at the doorway, observing the empty chairs around the dining table, their seats pressed into place yet unoccupied. I ran a hand over the polished surface of the table, noting the way the light reflected on the clean plates, the small imperfections in the placement of the party favors, and the tiny crumbs from the cupcakes that I had left as if to invite a child's eager hands. The quiet was almost tangible, pressing against the walls, the ceiling, and the soft furnishings, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a second cup of coffee, the steam rising in gentle curls, carrying with it the faint aroma of vanilla and sugar. I sipped slowly, feeling the warmth seep into my hands, allowing me a moment of reflection. I thought about the preparation for this day, the hours spent choosing the right decorations, baking the cupcakes, arranging the table, and envisioning the smiles and laughter of family gathered together. Each memory now felt poignant, a reminder of what had been hoped for, and what had been withheld. I moved back toward the dining room and adjusted a small balloon that had tilted slightly, its string catching on the edge of a chair. I straightened the napkins again, aligning them so that the folds matched perfectly across the table, and arranged the utensils with precise care. My eyes traveled to the banner stretching across the wall, the bright letters spelling out Lily's name, and I imagined the tiny hand reaching up to point at her own name, the bright giggle that should have accompanied the motion, the excitement in her wide eyes. I allowed myself to linger on these images, letting them fill the space with imagined warmth, even as the physical room remained empty. I walked slowly around the table, observing every detail from different angles, noting the shadows cast by the morning sun, the reflections on the polished surfaces, the way the light illuminated the little imperfections I had missed in my hurried preparation. Moved to the window once more and looked out over the quiet street, imagining Lily running toward the house, Michael calling her name, Vanessa following behind with her usual confident expression, and recognized the absence with a steady, composed breath. I returned to the table, picked up one of the plates, and traced the edge with my fingers, feeling the smooth porcelain, grounding myself in the tangible reality of my preparations. Each action, each movement became a meditation on patience, observation, and careful assessment. I recognized the pattern of exclusion that had repeated over the years, subtle signs of neglect, moments overlooked or intentionally ignored, and understood that awareness and quiet deliberation were as powerful as confrontation. I straightened a chair once more, adjusted the placement of a cupcake, and allowed myself to sit lightly, fingers intertwined, breathing in the sense and quiet, letting the calm settle over me, acknowledging the deliberate absence, and sensing that the day, though empty of voices and footsteps, held lessons and insights that I would carry forward into the next steps of understanding and subtle response. I stood in the middle of the dining room, letting my eyes sweep across every detail I had arranged, from the tiny pastel balloons floating gently near the ceiling to the polished silverware aligned precisely on the table. The morning sunlight streamed in through the bay window, illuminating the subtle folds in the napkins, the carefully placed cupcake on each plate, and the small party favors I had positioned with deliberate care. I took a slow, steady breath and let the quiet envelop me, the house holding its silence as a witness to the careful attention I had given this day. I walked toward the counter and adjusted the juice glasses, making sure each one reflected the sunlight evenly, their bright orange contents catching the light in a small, simple sparkle. I moved to the sideboard and ran my fingers lightly over the surface, noticing the faint smudges left from arranging decorations earlier, and allowed myself a small smile at the thought that even these minor imperfections held a story of effort and intention. I glanced at the photo albums lining the shelf and pulled one down, flipping through pages filled with Lily's past birthdays, remembering the wide-eyed excitement, the small hands eagerly unwrapping presents, and the laughter that had once filled this room. The contrast between those joyous memories and the empty chairs before me pressed gently against my chest, a reminder that absence could speak as loudly as presence. I walked back to the table and adjusted a balloon that had shifted slightly, letting it float back to its intended position, and ran my fingers over the edge of the table, feeling the smooth, cool wood beneath my touch. I took a slow sip from my coffee cup, its warmth seeping into my hands and calming the rising tension inside me. My gaze wandered over the banner stretching across the far wall, the bright letters spelling out Lily's name, and I imagined the small, delighted hand pointing to her own name, the giggle that should have followed, the eyes wide with anticipation. I allowed myself to linger on these imagined moments, letting them fill the room with life, even though no one else had arrived. I moved to the living room and straightened a few small items that had shifted, a subtle act of order and control, grounding myself in the space I had prepared with love and patience. I paused at the window and looked out, imagining the street animated with footsteps, laughter, and voices that would never come today, acknowledging the deliberate absence and letting the realization settle fully. I walked slowly back to the dining table, aligning each chair and napkin one more time, allowing the precise arrangement and quiet attention to details to remind me of my presence and care, even in the absence of others. I let my hands rest on the polished surface of the table and closed my eyes briefly, feeling the calm determination solidify inside me, understanding that observation, attention, and patience were as powerful as any immediate reaction, and that this day, though marked by absence, held the opportunity to see clearly, to understand fully, and to prepare carefully for the moments yet to come when awareness and subtle action could turn intention into quiet, undeniable presence. I walked to the far corner of the dining room, where the morning light caught the edges of the neatly arranged table, illuminating the careful alignment of plates, napkins, and utensils. I ran my fingers lightly over the table surface, feeling the smooth wood beneath my touch, and tracing the path my hands had made while arranging the decorations. I stepped back and allowed my eyes to travel across the empty chairs, the pastel balloons floating quietly near the ceiling, and the small birthday banner stretched above, its letters bright and cheerful. I recalled the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards under my own weight, and the soft wind brushing against the window pane. The house was still, filled only with the gentle echo of my movements, the scent of vanilla and frosting lingering in the air. I moved to the kitchen counter and adjusted the juice glasses once more, ensuring each reflected the sunlight evenly, small prisms of orange and gold in the morning light. I glanced at the cupcakes lined neatly on their trays and noted the subtle imperfections in their frosting, a reminder that even in small details, care and attention had been poured in. I walked slowly back to the dining table and picked up a party favor, turning it gently in my hands, imagining the smile on Lily's face as she would have received it. I let the image linger in my mind, a vivid contrast to the empty chairs before me, the quiet and deliberate absence of the family I had expected. I stepped to the window and looked out over the street, envisioning footsteps, laughter, and small voices that would never arrive today, allowing myself a quiet acknowledgement of the pattern that had been forming for years, subtle yet unmistakable. I returned to the table and straightened the chairs, each one precisely aligned with the edges, each napkin fold perfect. I ran my hands across the polished surfaces of the plates, feeling the cool porcelain, grounding myself in the tangible reality of my preparation and the deliberate care I had invested. I paused in the center of the room, inhaling deeply, letting the mixture of sense and quiet envelop me, sensing the patience and observation that had been quietly building within me. I recognized that this silence, this deliberate absence, held insight and power, a subtle understanding that would inform my next actions. I walked slowly around the table, adjusting minor details, letting each movement reinforce the awareness of the space, the care taken, and the contrast between expectation and reality. I stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the edge, and allowed my gaze to settle on the decorations, the cupcakes, the banner, and the empty seats. In that moment, I felt a steady resolve, a calm understanding that observation, patience, and careful attention could hold as much weight as any immediate confrontation, and that the morning, quiet and empty as it seemed, was also a canvas on which the truth would eventually be revealed and subtle, deliberate actions could take shape. I walked slowly to the kitchen counter, my hands brushing lightly over the smooth surface as I surveyed the room. The sunlight shifted, casting long, warm rays across the table, the chairs, the balloons, and the carefully aligned party favors. I placed a plate on the counter and studied the neat rows of cupcakes, imagining the delight they could bring if the family had been here. I opened a drawer and pulled out my small notebook, flipping through the pages filled with notes and observations from previous gatherings, each record a subtle reminder of the patterns I had begun to see. I jotted down a few new thoughts, connecting the absent gestures, the overlooked details, and the deliberate exclusions into a clearer picture of the situation. I took a deep breath and set the notebook aside, feeling the quiet resolve that had been building over the morning solidify into a plan. I walked to the dining table and adjusted the last of the decorations, ensuring that everything was in order, each item a testament to my attention and care, even in the absence of others. I paused and looked out the window, envisioning the family returning home, realizing that their choices had opened a door for conversation, for clarity, and for gentle, intentional correction. I moved to the living room and gathered a few photo albums, setting them on the coffee table where they would be visible, each image a subtle reminder of past joys and shared experiences, a foundation for the discussion I intended to have. I arranged my thoughts carefully, considering the words I would choose, the tone I would maintain, and the calm authority I would project. I walked to the phone and dialed a close friend, someone who had witnessed some of the previous incidents, sharing the situation calmly and seeking advice on how to address it without conflict, focusing instead on understanding, clarity, and gentle resolution. I returned to the dining room and arranged a small tray with coffee and glasses of juice, preparing a space that invited conversation, a setting that reflected patience, thoughtfulness, and composure. I allowed myself a quiet smile, recognizing that while the morning had begun with absence and disappointment, it had also revealed opportunities. The chance to communicate, to clarify misunderstandings, and to rebuild awareness within the family. I moved slowly around the room, checking the alignment of chairs, adjusting a balloon that had drifted, and smoothing the tablecloth once more, grounding myself in the deliberate actions that reflected my calm determination. I paused at the head of the table, resting my hands lightly on the polished wood, letting the sunlight warm my fingers, and felt the quiet confidence that comes from observation, preparation, and measured response. I recognized that the empty room, the silent house, and the careful arrangements were not symbols of failure but rather the foundation upon which a thoughtful, gentle resolution could be built, a resolution guided by clarity, patience, and quiet strength, setting the stage for the conversations and reconciliations that would follow in the hours to come. I took a final walk around the dining room, my hands brushing lightly over the polished surfaces, adjusting a napkin here, straightening a chair there, allowing each small movement to anchor me in the present and in my intentions. The sunlight had shifted to a warmer angle, casting soft golden hues across the carefully arranged decorations, the pastel balloons, and the birthday banner still stretched across the far wall. I paused for a moment and looked out the window, seeing the quiet street bathed in morning light, reflecting on the hours spent preparing, observing, and quietly reflecting on the patterns that had brought me to this point. I moved to the living room and picked up one of the photo albums I had set on the coffee table, flipping through the pages filled with memories of Lily and our family over the years, noting the moments of laughter, small triumphs, and the simple joy that these images captured. I placed the album back gently, feeling a sense of completion, as though each carefully arranged object in the room and each quiet observation had been a step toward understanding and reconciliation. I walked back to the table and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, its warmth spreading through my hands and grounding me in the calm clarity of the morning. I sat lightly in the chair at the head of the table, allowing my gaze to sweep across the empty seats, imagining the conversations that might unfold when the family returned, envisioning the careful, calm discussions that could bring understanding and rebuild connections. I thought of Lily, of her small hands reaching for the cupcakes, of her bright eyes, and I felt a sense of purpose and patience, knowing that even in absence, the care I had taken would be seen and understood. I let the quiet envelop me, considering the lessons learned, that observation, patience, and attention to detail can reveal truths and create opportunities for gentle guidance, that deliberate calm can hold as much power as confrontation, and that understanding the patterns of behavior allows for more thoughtful responses. I rose slowly, straightened a balloon that had drifted slightly, and allowed a small smile to form, feeling the quiet satisfaction of preparation, reflection, and readiness. The house, once still and empty, now felt imbued with intention, a space ready to welcome conversation and understanding, to bridge gaps, and to cultivate respect and awareness. I stepped back, taking in the full scene one last time. The arranged table, the pastel decorations, the untouched cupcakes, the faint sunlight illuminating the room, and I understood that patience and careful observation had turned absence into insight and preparation into quiet strength. The day had been transformed from disappointment into reflection, and as I stood there, I allowed myself to wonder quietly. What small gestures, what patient conversations, and what gentle actions could now turn these empty moments into bridges of understanding? And how would the family respond when they truly saw the care and intention that had been present all along? Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new stories.